What's going on, guys? New video. My first ever disc brake road bike. This is it. Been on rim brakes for about 10 years. I discussed this on the Nero show, what the goals of this build was. Here's me chatting about this months ago before I started piecing together this build. I don't know, you've probably seen this Tavelo brand that came up. So they got a new frame in the works, which is going to be released soon. They've said they're going to send me the frame. But then I'm like, well, it's kind of boring if I just build it with Ultegra. Like, ugh. So I'm thinking I would be keen to do the full direct from Asia spec. The Panda Podium build, basically. In short, I wanted to build the best possible disc brake race bike I could using non-mainstream parts. So most of these are going to be coming directly from Asia, and then seeing what the weight came to and seeing what the price came to, all of which I'm going to run through in this video. Obviously, when you're doing a bike build, starting point of any bike is the frame set. And this is it here, the Tavelo Arrow. Kind of a modern style mishmash of a bunch of different modern aero do-it-all kind of road bikes. So you've sort of, if we just want to speculate. So they've got the front end, a bit of a speed sniffer head tube kind of thing. So that's got a bit of an SL8 in it. Down tube, I actually think looks similar to sort of a Canyon Aero or a Cervelo S5, quite thin and narrow from the front and deep from the side. You've got the deep forks as well. And then at the back end, as GC Performance likes to call it, you sort of got a V4RS Colnago style thinned out back section of the frame. And so this is the size 540. That refers to the seat tube length though, not the top tube length. So this is equivalent to a sort of aggressive size 56 style if you want to compare between some other brands. Weight. What is the weight of the frame? 1,057 grams for the bare frame, and then the fork 382 grams. So if we're just talking about weight, where does the weight of this frame set sit? It's about the same weight as a Giant Propel Advanced Pro in a size 56. It's also lighter than a Canyon Aero CF SLX. It's not coming close to the SL8, which is probably one of the ones that you might be comparing this to looks-wise. Tire clearance, they say this officially suits up to 32 millimeters, but I've got, on these CRWs, which I'll talk about, the tires are coming up really wide, so the rear tire measures 33.8 millimeters wide, and I haven't had any wheel rub on the side of the frame. There's about a 3 mil gap on each side through the tightest spot, which is around the chainstays. And so, officially up to 32, you're going to have no problems running a 33, even up to a 34. It does have all these sort of cam tail, which was the old original Trek aero bike style, where it's you take an aerofoil, you chop off the back, and it's that sort of flat back aero tube shape. So that's that through the head tube, the down tube, and the back of the fork. Really deep head tube, so there is that sort of speed sniffer style to the front of the head tube. It sort of does sort of bulbous out, and if you turn the fork, you can see just how much excess material there is coming over the front of the headset bearings there. So aerodynamically, that should be saving some speed. There's no publicly available aero data on this frame, so if you want to know how well this performs aerodynamically through data, your guess is as good as mine. You're basically trying to piece together what bikes this looks like, and then assuming some of the aero performance there. So I having looked at this frame, especially from the front, you'll see just how thin it is from the front. I feel it's justified to say that the aero performance of this frame will be very similar to an SL8 or a Giant Propel or a Cannondale Super 6. So if you're familiar with Tour Magazine's testing results, I would go out on a limb and say this is probably in that 205 to 212 watt range in the Tour Magazine's rankings. I do think it would be up there, looking at all these tube shapes, having been to shops and looked at these side by side with the likes of the Giant Propel. But again, I've totally made that up, and I'm assuming that. Tavelo say this frame was developed in a wind tunnel in China, and they actually sent me some of the results, but said I can't share them. I really had to push them for the data, and they said don't share it. And so I don't really know what's going on. They say they're going to take this bike and they're going to try and get it to the UK for Western aero testing comparatively with some other bikes. So that might come. I would like to see that, from an aero bike, especially at this price range, which is not budget level of these direct from Asia frames. It is a more expensive kind of premium level in these Chinese frames. especially against the likes of the Seeker Spear, which is probably what you may be comparing this to if you're looking at these different kind of more premium Asian frames. That has objective testing data. This doesn't, so you're kind of left assuming. What else can I say about this frame? Stiffness, that's another one everyone wants to know. What's the stiffness like? This bike does not lack stiffness in any way. So the actual sort of bottom bracket stiffness, the head tube stiffness feels fantastic. Sprinting on it feels amazing. Accelerating on it feels amazing. I don't have anything to add in this stiffness chat other than saying feels absolutely as stiff as you'd want from an aero race bike. Stiffness as well, when you're chatting about it, comes into a lot of the other parts, which I'll discuss, like how stiff are the handlebars, how stiff are the wheels, how stiff are the cranks, because in the sort of the chain through all the components, there's a lot of ways flex can be introduced, but just the frame and the fork alone has been felt really good. I've been really happy racing on it. I'm going to interrupt myself, take a break, coil. In reviewing this frame, I'm not going to mention ride quality or comfort compliance. Just because this is my first disc brake road bike, I have nothing to compare it to. I can compare it to my old bike, but it's way more comfortable because of the tire width. And so I'd have to have more time riding different frames with these same disc wheels to be able to give you more information on the ride quality of the comfort. You'll have to go elsewhere for that kind of thing. There's no point mentioning it. I can't discern how comfortable or uncomfortable this frame is because it's the only disc road frame I've ridden. All right, back to the video. Quality, build quality and that sort of thing. What's it like? What issues have I noticed? So there was a couple of issues which were overcome, but they were issues in the initial build process. So the first thing was the bottom bracket, and this is played out with Peak Talks review and GC Performance did a review as well, walking through it. The bottom bracket is slightly undersized. I got sent a Cybrei, which is a thread-in bottom bracket. So this frame is a BB86, which is a press fit bottom bracket, but some of the modern bottom brackets are for press fit, but they thread into it. Each cup threads into itself, and they have a very stiff metal shell to the actual bottom bracket. And so where this bike was built by Jared at Tavelo, who's a local mechanic here in Sydney, I was there through the build processes, and when he was trying to screw this bottom bracket in, and we could see it there live, it was getting really tight to the point where it was almost kind of, it was stripping the threads on the actual bottom bracket cup because this thing just would not screw in. That issue was solved by me going and getting a regular press-in bottom bracket from a SRAM run, because I'm running a BB30 spindle that has a plastic bottom bracket cup that allows a bit of give. And so when this was pressed in, so Jared from Tavelo then took out that threaded one from Cybrei, pressed in the regular two separate cups with plastic shells, and that just allows a bit of give in the bottom bracket, and that went in fine. So that was annoying. That bottom bracket was just ruined. I had to throw that Cybrei bottom bracket in the bin because it was totally stripped of the threads. Tavelo said they're going to look at how it's being manufactured to try and fix this. But yeah, if you are looking at perhaps buying one of these, be aware of that bottom bracket issue. I would probably be asking Tavelo or Panda Podium or wherever you buy this frame from about what they've been doing to resolve that bottom bracket issue since we've been running into these issues. That was the only main issue build-wise I had with this frame. Jared mentioned that there are no cable guides through the handlebars and also through the frame set out the chainstay. So when you're running the hydraulic hoses through the frame, there is a lot of magnet time to try and get those cables to run through. He said in some of the other builds he's done, the handlebars or the frame will come with cable guides automatically running through them, and it just is a lot quicker to feed the cables through. So, the hoses in this case, because the shifting's wireless. So just be aware of that. He said it would have been nice if there was either channels through the handlebars or cable guides already installed. One other small thing is on the headset top cap spacer. Try and get video of it. There's a sort of a strip of air, the gap between where the headset bearing is and the top cap is, and some grit could get in there over time and cause premature wear on the headset bearings. That's just that headset design. It's not unique to this frame. There are many other modern bikes that have this style design, but it is not as secure from the elements as an old school top cap, weatherproof, that stops a lot of that water and grit getting in there. So that's something to consider. Aside from that, I had no other issues with this build and have had no issues other than that bottom bracket one since. So what I'm going to do is leave a rating out of 10 for each part. Just top of the head, How would I rate this part? 10 out of 10. It does everything perfectly and I'm blown away with it. 1 being it's not fit for use and was terrible. I'm going to rate each part. So out of 10, I have to give this frame set a 9 out of 10. If it wasn't for the bottom bracket being undersized and me having to mess around and buying a different bottom bracket and wasting the Cybrei one that I had to build it with, it would be a 10 out of 10 because the weight's really good, the stiffness is really good, the speed, which I got onto, I've been impressed with. I haven't really had any other issues with it. So I'm taking 1 point off for that bottom bracket issue, which they need to fix. I hope they can fix. But in terms of a frame set, I've been really happy with it. Handlebars. So this is included with the frame set. So price of this frame set, which I can probably get onto now that I'm talking about the handlebars, it's $1,880 including the handlebars. I think that is, compared to what I would be getting if I was buying a name brand Western frame set, that's going to come in at a similar aerodynamic performance and a similar price, and a similar weight. That is very cheap, especially given that comes with the handlebars. Generally, if you're going to buy handlebars aftermarket and integrated one piece, you're going to be spending at least 400 to 600 Aussie dollars to get the handlebars. So I think 1880 with these handlebars, given how I feel this frame set's performing, is fair. But pricing is always subjective. I'm sure there's people that would never pay, nearly $2,000 for a Chinese frame and handlebars, and I get that. I think personally, how this frame performs and the price and where it sits, I think the pricing is fair. Now, getting onto the handlebars, the length and width options of these bars is the standout. I'm running a 36 centimeter wide in a 130 length. There are very few handlebar brands that will allow you to do that. I think as someone that's racing and is just wanting to ride fast, coming in narrow in the handlebars is very important. And in doing this build, having a 36 width was a no-brainer for me. It was a non-negotiable. I wanted to go to 36s, given that I was on 38s on my previous bike. And I need the 130 stem for this geometry of frame with the reach to get my bike fit how I want it. And so I needed the handlebars to come in this spec. This was an option they had, and I think that's very impressive, especially that is included in the price. The actual shape of them, it looks fairly similar to the EXS Air Over handlebars. I'm saying it looks similar. It's definitely not the same. I've seen these two side by side in person, and they're definitely different. But if you're kind of looking at the shape, it's kind of similar to that. It's got this dimpling over the top on the flat section. That's on the top and the bottom. It's got these dimples, which helps with a bit of grip. It doesn't have a flare into the drops. Now, that's something most people, it might bug. I think a lot of people prefer having some flare into the drops, so it's a bit wider when you're riding in the drops. Personally, I prefer just a straight hood to drop, because I don't want I race a lot in the drops, and I don't want my hands, forearms, and elbows to be wider when I'm in the drops. So I like how they are, not having any flare. But if you're someone that really likes flare on the current handlebars you have, it may annoy you that these don't have much flare. I think there actually is some flare. I think it might be like 1 or 2 degrees, barely noticeable. The stiffness of the handlebars have been fantastic. I've ridden a lot of very expensive handlebars, Black Ink, Pro Vibe, Evo, Vision Metron 5D. The stiffness sprinting on these handlebars has been great. I did a 10-second all-time best power on these handlebars in one of the I think a week after I got this bike. I was doing some sprint training and hit a nice PB there, and these didn't flex any more than I'd want. They feel just as stiff as any of the bars I've run. Hey guys, quick pause in this video for an ad for this kit, and the kit that you've been seeing, the skin suit that you've been seeing throughout the video. This video is not paid for. It's not a paid promotion from any of the brands that I'm testing. It's making money from ad revenue and also kit sales. So this gilet that you see me wearing here, the skin suit that you've seen in the video, and also a black version of the skin suit are all available from the Nero shop. It's the kit we've been selling as part of the Nero show. We've got it all here in stock. We ship worldwide, free global shipping. You can pay in your local currency, and it's all in stock here in Sydney, Australia, ready to ship around the world. So if you've appreciated this video and you like the look of the kit, go and have a look at the link below. Read the reviews of the Nero suit, and all the information is there in the link below. Let's get back to the video. Other standout thing about these handlebars is the range of mounting options. So they come with the Garmin Wahoo mount with all the little plugs so you can run your Wahoo, your Garmin. It also comes with the GoPro mount for underneath out of the box. So bang, you chuck your Garmin on, and then you can put your GoPro mount on if you have lights mounted with the GoPro mount. So that's really nice that that's all included in the box. I didn't have to buy that separately. People aren't going to like these ratings, but I'm giving these handlebars a 10 out of 10. The range of lengths and widths, the stiffness, the performance, the mounting options, there's nothing I can fault about these handlebars. If someone asked, I'm doing a build, what handlebars should I get? I would not worry at all about recommending just speccing these as an aftermarket bar on a different bike. I just think they are really good. So just with these ratings, keep in mind, when I built this bike, every part I specifically chose because I want it to be as high performance as possible. And so going into this build, I was expecting it all to be really high ratings because that's why I chose all the parts. That was the whole point of this build. Let's move on then. This is probably one of the more interesting part of the group set of the build. It's the group set. And so I chose to build this with the L2 ERX electronic group set. And this is where we're going to start to see some issues with this build. In short, I'm no longer using this group set. I've moved over to Shimano Ultegra. So this was, out of this build, this is probably the biggest fail for me, unfortunately, which I was pretty disappointed with because out of all the build, trying this group set, I was really excited. It was one of the things I thought was quite unique about this build, and I really wanted it to work, but unfortunately it just hasn't performed up to scratch. Now, there's a few things to chat about here. As you can see, this isn't the standard L2 ERX that you can get that's currently available. This is their new updated version, which doesn't yet have a release date, which I think is a good thing because it's still essentially a beta product. So when I was speaking with Joe from Panda Podium about doing this build, he said, do you want the current release one or do you want the new blue version? And it's a bit light. And I thought, oh yeah, awesome. I'll get the new version. That'll be sweet. I'm keen to try it out. In hindsight, I regret that because it seems like in doing this update, they must have introduced a bunch more issues, which is okay because it's an update and it doesn't have a release date, but it's annoying for me because I've now received a beta product which doesn't work and I've had to take it off. And so let me just go into the group set just overall, assuming that it was working, because I kind of want to try and review it for people that are still going to consider buying the currently released version that's been out for a couple of years. Or if they do fix these issues with the reliability, then my review would still stand. Well, let me just address what was the issue. I had an issue with the button on the right-hand shifter that shifts the rear derailleur. It just wouldn't detect that I was pressing the button quite often throughout a ride. It would get worse throughout a ride. I'd press to go to a harder gear on the shifter. It wouldn't detect my press, and then the rear derailleur wouldn't shift. And then I'd have to press it 2 or 3 more times. Eventually, it would detect that I've pressed the shifter, and then it would work. And so it would kind of intermittently work with my rear shifting throughout a ride, which is quite frustrating and is obviously not. You can't live with that. So that was the issue I had. Assuming that wasn't an issue, overall, how did this group set perform? Now, weight-wise, this new version actually pretty competitive weight-wise. So it's 95 grams heavier than Shimano Ultegra 12-speed. Now, keep in mind, this is just for brakes, shifters, and derailleurs. This doesn't include any of the hard components like the chainrings and the cranks and the cassette. So it's lighter than 105 DO2. It's heavier than Shimano Ultegra DI2. So the weight, I was actually pretty happy with. The look of it, just quickly, I think it looks really impressive. Like, it looks quite modern. The rear derailleur is quite futuristic looking. The front derailleur is not too big. The shifters are bigger than a lot of the modern Shimano 12-speed or the new SRAM, Force and Red, which have really worked to get that shifter shape down and shifters smaller in size. So it does have a chunky shifter, but the actual derailleurs look quite good. Now, rear shifting quality. The rear shifting, I wasn't, even when it was taking away the shifter reliability kind of bug issue aside, the quality of the rear shifting was it was okay. Going down the cassette to a harder gear was fine. Going to an easier gear, and I've tried to get a video of this, but it's quite difficult to picture, it overshifts ever so slightly, which I think is to make the shift faster. And then it, after like 0.2 of a second, it comes back in line with the cog. And so every time you shift to an easier gear, there's a microsecond where it makes a bit of noise and it feels a bit clunky, and then it comes back in line. And then it shifts, it's a little bit out, comes back in line. I'm not sure if perhaps it looks like that might be something to get around a patent maybe that Shimano has with the rear derailleur, the way it shifts. I can't understand why you would want to, if you had free choice, to have it this way, because it basically makes every shift feel clunky. Now, when it's in gear and it comes back in line, it feels amazing. It's great. It's all locked in, no slipping, nothing. It's great. But like, there's no way around that issue of shifting to an easier gear does not feel as crisp and is not as fast as Shimano. So if you're coming from Shimano in particular, you will not be happy with the rear shifting quality, especially when going to an easier gear. If this is your first time using electronic shifting and you haven't used Shimano SRAM or Campy yet, you're probably pretty happy with it. You might not really notice. But yeah, rear shifting quality is kind of okay. Front shifting, this was actually amazing. The front shifting, even with my non-Shimano aftermarket chainrings, which I get onto, the front shifting was spot on. Never had any drop change. It was quite direct. Front shifting for me was like a 10 out of 10. If anything, the rim brake giant TCR I had that had 11-speed Shimano Ultegra, this was just as good, if not better, than that front shifting. Yeah, the front shifting they've done really well. Shifters, didn't really get on too well with. As I said, they're bigger than a lot of the modern other shifters. They are not as round. The actual hand feel of the shifters, they're kind of squared off underneath the rubber. I found they were a lot harder on my hands, and I could not for the life of me get them in the right place on the handlebars. I was kind of moving them up slightly on the handlebars to try and get the transition between the handlebar and the hood to be as smoother, but it never really felt good in my hands. And then I was lowering it. I just really couldn't get on with the shape and hand feel of these shifters. As soon as I went back to Shimano Ultegra 12-speed, it was fixed. To give it credit, the battery life on this was really good. I would go out for a ride, open the app, which connects really easily. You can check the battery life in there, and I was losing hardly any other. I'd go on a ride, I'd lose maybe 2%. So and I was through the whole build process, shifting it a bazillion times to dial in the shifting, going for rides. The drain in the battery life felt really good. So I do think you'll get a really good battery life especially out of this new version. I was quite impressed with it. Now, brakes, again, weren't amazing. They worked. They have to be used. They're not flat. I don't know the terminology exactly, so I apologize. They're not flat mount brakes. They require these adapters to be used on the road frames, which are kind of big and clunky and don't look that good. So you've got this really nice looking, one-piece molded disc caliper, but then to attach that to a road frame, you have to put these big mounts on. It just doesn't look very nice. So it looks like this is probably brakes that they've pulled over from a mountain bike or a gravel group set, and now they're just saying, yep, you can use these for road, and we'll use the same calipers for mountain bike, and like that. And I mean, they work, and that probably keeps the cost down, but it doesn't look as nice. So aesthetically, not great. Performance of the brakes, this was running the L2 brake pads too. It was okay. They were pretty loud because I've since been on Shimano Ultegra 12-speed, so I can kind of compare back and forth. The brakes are definitely quieter on the Shimano group set, and they do feel more powerful on the Shimano Ultegra. I don't know. A hard one concluding with the brakes. They do the job. They're fine. If I live somewhere, I live in Sydney, Australia. I'm not doing big alpine descents. If I live somewhere really hilly and I was commonly riding in the rain, doing long descents, I wouldn't be happy with these brakes. I would think it would be worth investing in one of the latest versions of SRAM or Shimano where the brakes are more powerful. But for the sort of riding I'm doing in the racing, the brakes were good enough. And so where does this leave me with this group set then? Now, I took it off because of the issue with the button to the rear derailleur, so I'm not using it anymore. But assuming that so that's like a 0 out of 10. It didn't work. So nothing more to say there. Now, but if I rate this group set, assuming I didn't have that issue, firstly, I wouldn't have put Shimano Ultegra 12-speed on. I would still be happy training, riding, and racing on this group set. It was good enough for that. But having gone back to Shimano Ultegra 12-speed, I would sort of give this a 6 out of 10 in comparison to that. So it's definitely not Shimano equivalent for cheaper. It's sort of gets the job done, but as I've gone through in all those specific issues, in certain use cases, you're going to want to spend more and get the better braking performance. And if you are used to the Shimano SRAM style of speed and crispiness of the rear shifting, you won't really be happy with this shifting to an easier gear. And that was pretty a shame. I was really hoping it would work and I could have found like a cheaper option compared to Shimano. But that's not the case. Crankset. This is a pretty cool one. I'm pretty stoked with this one. So this is the Cybrei carbon crankset with their alloy spider. For those of you as well that have a sneaky eye, Tadej Pogacar runs this on his time trial bike. Now I think it's got an SRM logo on it, but if you zoom in and look at the non-drive side crank, you can see it's a Cybrei crank. So what are they? It's a carbon crank with a 30 millimeter BB30 spindle. And what this does is just strips weight from the entire build. So compared to my Shimano Ultegra cranks, these are 160 grams lighter. So just snap your fingers, you've taken off, 150 grams from your build weight, which is like a lot to just cut out in one part. They use a 30 millimeter spindle, which is wider. That is, and Jared from Bruvello mentioned this, is not ideal just because the wider spindle means your bottom bracket has a smaller bearing to fit that spindle. And so from a bottom bracket point of view, from a longevity of the bearings, it would be better to use a Shimano 24 millimeter narrower spindle, and you have a nice big bearing sitting in there, especially when you've got this BB86 frame. That's a slight downside of these cranks in that you potentially wear through bearings slightly faster, so it's worth mentioning that. But stiffness of these cranks has been fantastic. No stiffness issues. One of the concerns is you got a really light crank. Maybe they're not stiff enough. Absolutely not the case at all. They feel plenty stiff. The price, they are pretty pricey at $499 US. That's for the cranks and the spider. So yeah, but you are paying to get that weight off the bike. But especially with cranks, I feel like the cranks is a part that you just install, and these are lighter, they're stiff enough, and you don't really think about it. So as a place to strip weight out of the bike, I like it because it's set and forget. But you do have to pay for that premium. But if you're doing a custom build like this, the money that you save through some of the other parts, like the wheels and the saddle, which I'll get onto, and paying less than Western prices for the frame set, for example, you can then take that money and invest it in parts like this, which keeps the weight of the build down. And so that's how you're getting that competitiveness in terms of the price to weight to aerodynamics. And so these cranksets are playing a part in the performance of this bike overall. I did go down to 165 millimeter length cranks. I am 189 centimeters tall. I have always ridden 175s. I could spend a lot of time speaking about going to shorter cranks. It's kind of the modern thing to do. I'll try and keep this relatively quick. What have I noticed going to shorter cranks? Not that exciting, really. One of the concerns is when you go to shorter cranks, you've got less leverage. Your torque is therefore less effective, and therefore you may lose top-end power. I haven't noticed a drop in anaerobic or sprint power, or even aerobic power as well. I haven't essentially noticed any drop in power at all. As I said, I've done a 10-second sprint PB on these cranks. My FTP, even though obviously that changes with how much training I'm doing and things like that, has been responding really well to training. I'm really happy with how I've been racing and the numbers in training. So essentially, the concern that you going to shorter cranks, you might be more comfortable and more aero, but less powerful, I personally haven't seen come to fruition in my training and racing. The upside of the shorter cranks is that at the top of pedal stroke, your hip is less closed. That puts less stress on the hips and the back, allowing you to hold. Actually, not even necessarily allowing you to hold a more aero position. That in itself, if you don't change anything, for most people, they note being more comfortable, myself included. And then if you're racing and you want to ride in a more aerodynamic position, the flow-on benefit of that is you can get a lot more rocked over, and you don't have that closing of the hip angle at the top of the pedal stroke. and therefore, again, it just allows you to hold the aero position with more comfort. And I have noticed this. The way I describe this is locking, let's say you're doing a 30-minute, 40-minute effort in training, locked in at nice steady power, zone 3, zone 4. Towards the end of that effort, you might notice that you get a bit of pain in the glutes, pain in the back, just like someone's kind of prodding you, and you get the urge to sort of sit up and stretch the back out, and you need that kind of relief in pressure. With the shorter cranks, I do feel like it essentially moves the point at which you feel that pain way further down the track. And so when you're locked into an effort, it just feels more comfortable, and that's essentially the main benefit I've got, is I can go locked in the drops in a race, doing an effort, and I'm more comfortable, and I'm not any less powerful. And so that's been my experience on the shorter cranks. Essentially a net win, pretty much no downside. And yeah, I would recommend, if you are doing a build and you've always been on 170 plus length cranks and you want to experiment with some shorter cranks, my personal experience has been nothing but positive moving down. So overall, what am I giving the Cybrei carbon cranks out of 10? I'll take a point off because of that 30mm spindle. It would be mechanically more sound if they could manage to do it with a 24mm spindle, so you can use a bigger bearing in the bottom bracket. So I'll take a point off for that. I guess the price as well, it is fairly expensive, but I think for what you're getting, it's worth it to save that weight. And so I'll give it a 9 out of 10 because it's pretty much doing everything perfectly except for that spindle. So yeah, a 9. These are stoked with the performance of the Cybrei cranks. Chainrings, the next one. I've been using Pass Quest chainrings. I actually put these on my old Giant TCR before I built up this Tavelo, so I've been testing these for quite a while. Bit of a back and forth on these. I haven't actually really made up my mind on them, so let me go into it. So on my Giant TCR, which had Shimano 11-speed Ultegra, these chainrings were fantastic. No, they were plenty stiff, no stiffness issues. The front shifting was really good. And so I was very happy with these Pass Quest chainrings. On the LTWOO Groupset, when I first built the Tavelo, shifting was really good. Again, no issues. Happy with them. So that was all looking good, and I was about to, if I was going to chat about this, that would have been, I think they're amazing. I have had an issue with Shimano 12-speed Ultegra and these chainrings. When shifting to the big chainring, for some reason, I really need to back off the power when making that shift. If I have too much pressure on the pedals when I'm making that shift, the chain has a tendency to jump off and it makes a terrible sound. And Edwin, from Case, who installed the Shimano Groupset, he noticed the same thing. He tried getting it set up. He said, look, these chainrings, I just cannot get the front derailleur to mesh well with it. Now, I'm actually kind of got to go to the audience here, go to you guys. If anyone has had a similar issue with Shimano 12-speed with the Pass Quest chainrings, let me know. Is this just an inherent issue? He thought maybe because the motor in the front derailleur is just stronger in 12-speed than it is on 11-speed and on the LTWOO Groupset. Perhaps that was causing a bit of an issue. It was almost, the motor might potentially is just too strong for the stiffness of the chainrings. I don't know if that's true, or if you have managed in some way to get the Pass Quest chainrings to mesh well with 12-speed Shimano, let me know. I did go up in chainring size as well, so I'm using a 56-42 size, which works because I'm in Sydney. I do a lot of training and racing at high speeds, so it's really nice to have more usable gears down the back end of the cassette. When I'm in a harder gear, I'm not just stuck in the 11 or 12 and that's it. I've got sort of 3 or 4 more usable gears when my speed's up higher, up above 40, 45 kilometers an hour. So it's really nice to have that option. And then because of 12 speed, you've got the bigger cassette options. And so I haven't lost my easier gear, but I'll get onto that when I chat about the cassette. So essentially I've got the same easy gear, but just more of these bigger, harder gears to use with that 56 tooth chainring. So I've used 2 different types of these Pass Quest chainrings. The hollow ones, which have a bit more drilled out, and the filled-in aero style ones. I haven't noticed any difference between either of them. I did have to drill the front derailleur mount out slightly on the TCR and on the Tavelo so that the railer could sit high enough to clear the 56 tooth chainring. So that's quite niche. I don't know how many people are going to be buying a Tavelo and use a 56 tooth chainring, but I don't know. If you're out there, keep in mind you will have to shave out some material from the front derailleur mount to get the derailleur clear of the chainrings. The only real reason that I'm using these chainrings, because I would now go back to Shimano ones, is really difficult, if not impossible, to find 5642 Shimano chainrings. I just, for some reason, they don't make them, not in stock, and that's where these Chinese brands come in. You can go on PassQuest or AliExpress, order a 5642, and it arrives in 4 or 5 days. So Shimano are kind of dropping the ball there in terms of having stock available. So that's quite frustrating. So how would I rate these chainrings on LTWOO and on 11-speed Shimano Ultegra? They were, again, a 10 out of 10. The shipping's fast, the pricing's good, there's plenty of options. They've got one-buy options, all the different chainring sizes, all the different crank compatibilities. The price is good, as I said, and the shifting is good, and the stiffness is good. And so they did exactly what I wanted, but not on 12-speed. And so maybe if you have any more info on why I'm having issues there, let me know. Maybe get in the comments if you can, provide some clarity on there. But just keep that in mind. If you're considering these chainrings, just check the comments, see if there's any discussion around what's going on with that 12-speed, because I can't get it to work, and I will probably end up taking them off if I can't get that problem fixed, because it's too risky to drop the chain. So Cassette, this is another place I shaved weight from the initial build. So this came from Panda Podium too. This was the Incolor Zoney 1130. Now what 12-speed and the bigger cassettes allow me to do is to, with that 30-tooth easiest gear on the cassette, that allowed me, with the 4230, was the same easy gearing as I had on my old rim brake bike with a 39 chainring and a 28 cassette. So I've been able to go to these bigger chainrings and have the same easy gear with an 1130 cassette, which was really nice. So the Incolor Zoney cassette Pros, it is light, so it's lighter than Shimano Dura-Ace because it's all machined from one piece of aluminium. It's 199 grams. Shimano Ultegra is 291 grams. Dura-Ace is 223 grams. And it's also cheaper than Dura-Ace. And so if you're trying to save weight, it's good for that. The problem is the shifting quality is not as good as Shimano. It's about half as good, because Shimano, the Hyperglide, if you've ever seen that on Shimano systems, is patented. So there are a lot more shifting grooves and pins on a Shimano cassette than there is on this Incolor Zoney cassette. And so I am no longer using this cassette because the shifting was just so much faster with the Shimano cassette. And I tried back and forth both with the Shimano Ultegra 12-speed group set. And so I've tried it with the Incolor Zoney cassette, and I don't feel like the drop in shifting quality is worth it for the drop for the weight that you're saving. It's not that the chain's bouncing around or comes off or slips or anything. It's just that it's slower to shift because there's just less pins to pick up that chain and move it across. And so, the shift might take twice as long, which isn't very nice. So who is this sort of cassette for? If you're trying to do a really lightweight build, and maybe if this isn't your only bike, but you have a couple of bikes and you want to do one weight weenie build, really good way to save weight, and it doesn't cost that much compared to Dura-Ace. And so I think if you're doing a weight weenie build and it's not your everyday ride, I'd give it maybe an 8 out of 10, losing points for that shifting quality. If you're just building one bike and you race a lot and you train a lot, I'd give this cassette like a 5 out of 10, just because you're not going to enjoy the shifting quality of it, and I don't think it's worth it if you're riding, racing, and training a lot. So just keep that in mind with this cassette. It does have a use case. It's not for your racer that's crushing the kilometers. So that's the Incolor Zoney cassette. Wheels. I'm excited for this section. The wheels. The CRW Works 65/75s from Panda Podium. I mean, rating 10 out of 10. Come off the bat. As you can tell, I'm pretty excited. These wheels are they're incredible. They're just the weight, to the depth, to the width, the stiffness. It just ticks the boxes across the board. And so the depth of this wheel 65 front, 65 front, 75 rear is extremely fast. There's no way around it. Deeper wheels are faster, so you're saving aero drag through the depth. But even though they're that deep, and this is where it's kind of mind-blowing, they only weigh 1,430 grams per set, which is the same weight as like most name brand wheels that are 40, 50 mil deep and narrower. So the weight, I'm able to get a 7.2 kilo build, no pedals, with wheels that are full-on aero flatland racing wheels. It's crazy. So the weight, the depth is fantastic. The width as well. When I was coming to disc, I wanted to go wide. I believe in wider tires for road, and these get me there. So the front rim has a 25 millimeter internal, 34 millimeter external. So with that, the benefit of that wider rim on the front means that you can run a nice 28 or even a 30 millimeter tire. And then aerodynamically, the rim is still wider externally, so you're not losing aero drag, and so you're getting that nice ability to run a lower pressure, have that lower rolling resistance when the roads get rougher, but still aerodynamically is still fast because you're not having that mushroom shape over the front rim. The rear wheel is narrower, so 23 internal, 32 external, and that's mainly, I think that's just to save weight, and because aerodynamically you're not going to lose as much on the rear wheel if your tire is sort of mushrooming over the rim. And so I'm running the setup that I have now is a 28 millimeter tire on the front, 32 millimeter tire on the rear. The only downside is the crosswind stability. If these are only if you're only going to buy one set of wheels, do not buy these, because if it's windy with this depth of wheel, is unsafe. You get blown around a lot. Now that's no fault, in my opinion, of the wheel. That's just because the rim is really light and really deep. If you were only going to have one set of wheels, I would get the 50/60s, which are the same width, but a shallower. So they'll be better to deal with crosswinds. If you have more than one wheel set, I would get these. So what I do now is I've got the 65/75s, and I've actually got the 50 as a single front wheel from the 50/60s. So I got 3 CRW wheels. And so I'll use the 65/75s 90% of the time. And then if I'm doing a race where it's really windy, I'll just swap the front wheel for the 50 from that 50/60 combo. And that just allows me to deal with the crosswinds better. That's pretty much the only downside of these wheels. As you see from a lot of other people reviewing the wheels, these are fantastic. Just 10 out of 10. These wheels, there's nothing more I could possibly ask from these wheels. Even little things like they came with the lock ring for the rotor, which a lot of other wheels don't come with. And so you buy the wheels and you're going to put them on and you put the rotor on and there's no lock ring with a lot of other wheels. Whereas these come with a nice CRW branded lock ring. So little things like that are quite nice. So yeah, the wheels are fantastic. Tires. This was another whole part of this build as I've bought into the wider tire for road hype. And so initially I'm running GP 5000s, tubeless. I put a 32 millimeter on the rear and a 30 millimeter on the front. And so the rear was measuring 33.8 wide, which is crazy, which is fantastic for comfort. And so at 80 kilos, the kind of recommended tire pressure is depending on the road surface, anywhere from sort of high 50s, maybe 55 for really rough roads, up to kind of 70 psi for smoother roads. Given the CRWs are hooked, I can go up to higher pressures. So I'll run 70 psi if it's super smooth, hot mix, flat track, in which case it's not any slower, it's nice and fast. And then I've got the option to drop the pressure as the roads get rougher. And the comfort that this width is giving is amazing. I mean, like the road buzz that this cuts out is probably 50-60% on rough roads, dampened from my rim brake bike with sort of 25-28 millimeter tires. It just soaks up a lot of that vibration. So it's a really nice ride experience, plus more puncture protection, plus more grip. So I'm fully on board. If you watch the Nero show, you already know I'm fully on board for these wider tires. The only thing I have done since I first installed these tires. They've actually gone back to a 28mm front tire, just because that front was measuring 33.3mm wide. And I do think aerodynamically, at really high speeds, that's got to be adding a few watts. I can't quantify that, but with a 28mm tire on the front, that gets the measured width to, I might have to go remeasure it. I think that gets the measured width to sort of 31mm on the front, which is still really wide, and that's still very comfortable. I can still run the lower pressures and it'd be really fast, but should save me a bit of speed. I don't really need a 33.3mm measured width front tire. So I've gone back to a 28 on the front, still 32 on the rear. Last part of the build was the saddle. I bought this from Aliexpress. It's called the Riot 3D printed bicycle saddle, ultralight carbon fiber, hollow, comfortable, breathable mountain bike, gravel, road bike, cycling seat parts. That is what it's called. It's got a carbon shell, a 3D printed top. It's the same shape as the Shimano Pro Stealth saddle that I had been using. It is right now, it's like 50, I think I paid 65 Australian dollars. I think now it's 50. It's like, which is stupidly cheap. It weighs 165 grams. It's lighter than pretty much every other carbon saddle, name brand ones. Like, it's lighter than the S-Works Power carbon one. As I said, similar shape to the Pro Stealth. I'm still using it, so I've done like maybe 1,500 kilometers on this bike now, and that saddle is still on there, and I'm still going to be using it. It's comfortable. It's, yeah, for the price, it's fantastic. So I'd kind of rate it 9 out of 10. I think I would like it if the padding on the top, that 3D printed material is quite flexy. I would prefer a little stiffer, not as soft, but I'm kind of nitpicking. And I'd even prefer it to be a little smoother, more like a normal saddle on the top. But overall, yeah, great saddle. Been really happy with that for the price. That's just, yeah, crazy what they can do. I did buy two just to test. I bought an even lighter one, which was from the same brand, Riot, which was, I think it was 115 grams, and it was absolute dog shit. As soon as I sat on it, because it's so light, the whole thing just sagged in the middle. Did one ride on it and took it off. So just be careful. I am only vouching for this specific saddle. I'm not vouching for all AliExpress carbon ones, even other ones from this Riot brand, because some of them do suck. And so I'll put up a photo of the one I bought that I didn't like. Even though it's lighter, that was too good to be true. Maybe if you weigh 50 kilos, it won't be a problem for you. But as someone who was 80 kilos, it was way too flexy. It was terrible. So that's the saddle. Okay. If you're still listening, because this video is really gonna be dragging on, pricing, total cost for this build was $5,399 US. That doesn't include the build cost though, so keep in mind, if you're not building this yourself and you got to go to a mechanic, you'd have to factor in the cost of building it. Talking about pricing of bikes is actually really hard because it's very subjective. And it depends on what you kind of want. I mean, if I was going to buy a stock bike, because let's compare this, right? So the Giant Propel Advanced Pro with Ultegra is $8,000. The Canyon Aero CF SLX8 is $6,599 US. So the cost of this build came in under that at $5,399. But I have a problem with the price of stock bikes because I change so many parts. Like if I bought a Giant Propel, for example, I would want to change the gearing, so the chainring size, the crank length. I'd want wider tires, so I'd have to buy new tires. I'd want narrower handlebars. I'd probably have to change the stem length. I may also want to change the saddle. I probably want to go to wider width wheels, so I'd probably have to buy new wheels. So it's really hard to compare costs from a custom build, which the pricing is already competitive compared to those. But when you then consider how many parts you'd have to change from a stock bike, that pricing gets more attractive. Other thing as well, like the Giant Propel, I think comes with a power meter. Lots of the Canyons come with a power meter. I've always used Tavelo Handlebars, the pedals. And so I don't need a power meter. So if I got like a Giant and it came with a Giant power meter in the crank, I probably wouldn't want that. And so I'd either leave it on there and it's just a waste of money, or I take it off to change the cranks and then I have to sell it. And then there's probably not many people wanting to buy a secondhand giant power meter. And so that whole power meter thing tends to be a little bit of a waste of money too. And so the fact that the stock bikes, a lot of them come with a power meter, for me isn't a pro. But that depends. If you don't have a power meter, then you may also have to factor in the fact that some of the stock bikes come with a power meter, which you might like. So that's an individual thing there. Other thing as well, because of how I've built this bike with the Cybrei Cranks, with the lighter CRW wheels, with a lighter saddle, the total build weight comes down. Like a Canyon Aeroad CFS LX8, a Giant Pavelo Advanced Pro, they're all going to be 7.8 to 8 kilos. This is 7.2. They're just not going to be able to come in at the same weight as if you do a custom build and source some lighter parts from Asia. So that's the other positive of doing the build. Now, obviously, I had issues with the L2 ERX Groupset, and right now, based on the one I used, I don't really recommend it. And so keep in mind the $5,399 US price is probably not realistic, because I would recommend just getting 105 DO2 from Shimano or SRAM Rival or something like that, and that's going to be a little bit more expensive. So keep that in mind. And so that's the individual part. So to sort of review the bike overall, we know what the weight is. The weight's really competitive. The performance of any of the parts individually, I've kind of gone through. Subjectively, the bike, the package, I won't even say the bike, because when I say bike, it kind of means frame, but I mean the package overall. Directly comparing to my rim brake Giant TCR, the package feels just as stiff. It's only about 300 or 400 grams heavier with discs than the Giant TCR was. So that weight penalty, I don't think is massive. It's a lot more comfortable with this package, predominantly because of the wider tires, the lower pressures. And so it's just as stiff. Feels just as lively and really enjoyable to ride. It's more comfortable. But what about the speed? Like, is it actually faster? It is, and quite significantly. So I've done a whole bunch of efforts, Zone 4 efforts, and I've kind of taken out the ones that are in really extreme windy conditions and put in a whole bunch of the ones that are in kind of regular conditions. And obviously day-to-day conditions change and I'm wearing different clothing, but because I've done so many efforts, I can sort of average them up and give a rough idea of what the speed is. So they all ended up being roughly at the same power, because I'm always training when I'm doing those Zone 4 efforts around the same power. So on the Giant TCR, across a whole bunch of efforts, 8 efforts that were in similar conditions, at a power of 357 watts, my average speed was about 41.7 kilometers an hour. When I moved to the Tavelo, I've since done 5 efforts at a similar power. So the average of those came to 356 watts. So, within a watt average. And the average speed across all those efforts was up to 42.4. So that's kind of the speed difference, 41.7 to 42.4. And then using a power speed CDA calculator, if we kind of look at how many watts does that save. So at the CDA, so the aero drag of that effort on the TCR, if I was to try and up that average to 42.4, I'd have to do about an extra 20 watts at that other CDA. So that's sort of the speed saving. Now, yeah, the wheels are deeper. So the wheels I was using on the Giant TCR were 50 mil deep. This is me moving to the 65-75s. The handlebars have also come in 2 centimeters, so I've gone from 38s to 36s. The shorter cranks may also be helping me more comfortable, so maybe I'm not moving around my upper body as much, which is maybe saving some aero drag. And so, yeah, so you can nitpick and figure out or speculate where chunks of those savings have come from. But just across the board, that's across the packages, that's kind of the speed saving at this 40 kilometer an hour speed. It sounds hard to, I get that sounds hard to believe, but the numbers don't really lie. Like, that's just what the numbers show. That's also then consider the added benefits of it is also more comfortable and smoother because of those tires. The braking is superior, especially in the wet with the disc brakes. Overall, in terms of a ride experience, now I'm not going to go into this whole rim versus disc thing. There's obviously downsides of disc brakes, like the maintenance and things like that, and there are heavier. But just as a ride experience overall, I've been very, very happy with this package. So that's kind of my thoughts on the whole build. That's what I've done. That's my review. I'll put up a photo now of what the bike looks like. This is what I'll be sticking with for the rest of the year. So I've taken the cassette off. I've obviously taken the LTWOO Groupset off and put on Shimano Ultegra 12-speed. I have gotten myself the CRW 50mm deep front wheel, and that's the changes to how it looked initially. And yeah, overall, as you can probably tell, I'm really happy with how I've ended up with this package of bike. I will be checking comments on here, so if you have any comments, questions, and feedback and things like that, or anything I've perhaps missed, let me know in the comments, and I'll get back and provide more info on it. Thanks for watching this video, guys, and I'll catch you in the next one, whenever that may be.